I don't think I've told this story to anyone who's believed me. Most people laugh, nod politely, and assume I'm exaggerating for drama. A few look unsettled, like they want to believe but don't want the nightmares that come with it. And one or two, the ones who felt that same unnatural cold or heard whispers from the dark, they just go pale and never speak to me again. My name's Daniel. I used to be a cave diver and amateur geologist. Back then, my life was nothing but rock, dust, and narrow places. I loved the thrill, crawling through places where sunlight never touched, where the weight of the earth pressed down and you could feel how small you were. Black Ridge Cavern was supposed to be the biggest find of my life. It started with an old mining map, a half-forgotten document from the early 1900s. A friend at the Historical Society handed it to me, joking that it might point to buried treasure. But there was one marking on the map that caught my eye, a shaft labeled The Hollow. No depth, no notes, just a name, scratched in by hand and underlined twice. That's what drew me and my three friends, Marcus, Evelyn, and Tom, to the forest in the autumn of 2014. We hiked 3 days into the Black Ridge Range before we found the entrance, a jagged hole behind a curtain of ivy, barely wide enough for a man to crawl through. It breathed cold air, wet and metallic, that smelled ancient. At first, it was exactly what we expected. Damp limestone walls, dripping stalactites, the occasional scuttling bat. We laughed, made crude jokes, and set up base about 200 meters in. But the deeper we went, the more off things felt. It started small. Echoes that didn't match our voices. A pebble falling somewhere far away, though none of us had moved. The sense that the tunnels behind us weren't quite the same as when we'd passed through them minutes before. Still, we pressed on. Explorers don't stop because of bad vibes. After 5 hours of crawling, climbing, and squeezing through fissures, we found something that shouldn't have been there. A tunnel perfectly round and unnaturally smooth. It wasn't carved by tools or water. It looked as if the stone had been melted. We argued about whether it was safe. Tom, always the bravest, I'd volunteered to go first. He clicked on his headlamp and disappeared into the dark, his light shrinking to a pinprick ahead of us. Feels like walking into a throat, he joked through the radio. But 5 minutes later, his voice had gone static. Then silent. We hurried after him, calling his name, our boots crunching on strange black dust that clung to everything. The tunnel narrowed, then widened into a vast chamber. And that's when we saw it. The room was unlike anything I've seen in nature. Perfectly spherical, with a ceiling lost in shadow and walls that shimmered like obsidian glass. The air was colder here, unnaturally still. And on the far side, half submerged in a pool of dark water, was Tom's backpack. But no Tom. We called for him until our throats hurt. Nothing. Just the slow drip of water and a deep, low hum that seemed to vibrate in the walls. Maybe he fell in, Evelyn whispered. But when Marcus knelt by the pool and shone his light into it, we saw no bottom, just blackness that seemed to move. We should have left then. We all knew it, but the tunnel behind us looked wrong. It curved differently, sloped deeper as if the cave had rearranged itself while we weren't watching. Panic started gnawing at my chest. We marked the walls with chalk and moved forward, hoping to find another exit. That's when the whispering began. It was faint at first, like distant water or wind. Then clearer, a language none of us knew, echoing from nowhere and everywhere. Marcus swore it was Tom's voice. Evelyn said it was multiple voices speaking at once. All I knew was that it felt like they were inside my head, curling around my thoughts. We stumbled deeper, driven more by fear than reason. The tunnels twisted, sometimes opening into impossible spaces, caverns too vast to exist beneath the mountain, with spires of bone-white stone that pulsed faintly when our lights hit them. Other passages were so narrow we had to crawl belly down, the rock warm against our skin like living flesh. I lost track of time. Hours, maybe days. My watch stopped working. Our radios hissed static, our compass spun uselessly, and always the whispers followed. At some point, Evelyn vanished. One moment she was ahead of me, the next her headlamp winked out. We called, screamed, searched, nothing. Only a single glove lying in the dust, its fingertips burned black. Marcus broke after that. He started laughing, muttering that the cave was hungry, that we were being digested. He ran into the dark and I never saw him again. I was alone. The cave shifted around me like it was breathing. Corridors I'd passed before were gone. New ones opened silently. I stopped trying to fight it and just walked, following the whispers. Eventually, I found another chamber, larger than the first, and colder. And there in the center was something I will never forget. It was a column 20 feet tall, made not of stone but something black and wet and pulsing, like a heart turned inside out. And embedded in it, faces. Dozens of faces, some twisted in agony, some eerily calm. One of them was Tom, another was Evelyn. And one, at the very top, looked exactly like me. I fell to my knees and screamed. The whispers turned into words then, clear, commanding. Join. I don't know how I escaped. I remember running, clawing at the walls, crawling through cracks that shredded my skin. I remember light, faint cold daylight, spilling from a fissure far above me. And then I was outside, lying in the forest, my gear gone, my mind fractured. It's been 9 years. I never found Blackridge Cavern again. The coordinates lead to a patch of bare rock with no opening. No one believes there was ever a cave there. But I know what I saw. I know what took them. And sometimes when I close my eyes, I still hear the whisper, join. I didn't mean to stumble onto it. The monastery had been abandoned for decades, perched on a cliff in Romania, its spires broken, windows shattered, bell long gone. We were a group of 5 amateur spelunkers, mostly thrill-seekers, curious about what might lie beneath. Nobody had explored the cave system rumored to run under the monastery, not fully, not without vanishing. I remember the first step inside the main shaft. Dust thick as fog, the smell of mold and wet stone filling my nostrils. We brought ropes, headlamps, and radios. I was documenting the trip, filming everything. Walls, debris, broken statues. And a sense of unease settled on me the moment we stepped beyond the first chamber. At first, it was ordinary. Narrow passages, stalactites hanging like jagged teeth, small pools reflecting our lights. But then I noticed the eyes carved into the stone, hundreds of them all staring. They followed us as we moved. The deeper we went, the more intense their gaze became. Not realistic eyes, but shapes resembling them. Almond forms, circles with dots in the center. Jagged orbs that seemed to twist when you weren't looking directly. The air grew damp, thick, and heavy. My breathing became shallow, every step echoing unnaturally. Then the water began rising. Not slowly, not gradually. It seemed to surge like it had a mind, seeping from the walls, pooling in low spots, forcing us into higher corridors. It wasn't logical. There were no rivers, no underground streams that could account for it. Yet the water came, forcing us into loops. I swear the tunnels bent back on themselves, repeating. Corridors we had already traversed, stalagmites in the same positions but somehow different. A cruel trick of the cave or something else? Panic set in. One of us, Andre, began screaming when a shadow moved independently of him. It mimicked his gestures perfectly, yet lagged slightly behind as if it were studying him. Then it vanished, only to appear in the reflection of a pool a few meters away, grinning with an impossible angle to its jaw. We ran blindly, slipping in the rising water. My camera caught flickers of movement at the edges of the frame, silhouettes disappearing into walls, faint whispers I could not understand. By the time we reached the second major chamber, it was clear. The cave was alive. Not alive in the sense of moss or fungi, alive in the sense of thought, awareness. It adjusted, moved, reshaped itself, and it did not want us there. Luca, the youngest, vanished next. One moment he was gripping my shoulder, the next gone. I heard his voice screaming in the water-filled corridor, but every time I turned, it was gone. I was paralyzed with fear, watching the shadows twist into forms I could not name. Then I saw it. A figure, tall and black, neither human nor beast, gliding along the tunnel walls as if they were liquid. It didn't walk, it flowed. And the eyes, hundreds of them carved into the walls, all focused on me, pulsing with a faint red glow. I tried to call for the others. Nothing. Radio's dead. Only the sound of dripping water and my own heart pounding in my ears. I ran. I clawed through narrow passageways, desperate for light. Some corridors seemed to stretch endlessly, taking hours to cross, though they should have taken minutes. Time itself was warped. Finally, I stumbled into a chamber filled with symbols on the walls. Spirals, spiraling eyes, claw-like markings. And there at the center, a small stone altar, ancient, polished, and warm to the touch. I could feel something emanating from it, a pulse that resonated with my bones. I fled without thinking, tearing through tunnels that bent and twisted. The sound of water was replaced by whispering, a chorus of distorted voices calling my name. And when I finally burst out into the monastery courtyard, daylight blinding me, I realized I was alone. The other four never emerged. Not a trace of them. Locals insist the caves under the monastery are just old mining tunnels, harmless and empty. But I know better. The air there hums. The walls watch. And I can still hear Luca's voice calling from the water, somewhere below, trapped in a loop that will never end. I have nightmares every night. I wake drenched, feeling wet stone under my hands, smelling the metallic tang of stagnant water. And every now and then I see eyes and shadows reminding me, the cave is still alive. Still waiting, I will never return. But I also know the cave will come for me if I don't keep moving. I still remember the first time I saw it. A jagged black slit at the base of an Icelandic glacier, humming faintly like the earth was breathing. My team and I were geologists, obsessed with caves formed by volcanic activity beneath ice. We'd heard rumors from locals about shifting tunnels under the Vatnajökull glacier, but no one had ever explored them. Not fully. Not and lived to tell. I should have walked away that day. I should have left it alone. But curiosity? Curiosity is stronger than fear. We arrived in the early morning, the sun barely grazing the snowfields. I was with 4 others, Sigrid, the team leader, John, a former spelunker, Katrin, a volcanologist, and Henrik, the youngest, obsessed with documenting everything on camera. We roped ourselves together and began our descent through the icy slit. At first, it was beautiful. Walls of translucent ice glowing with blue light, tiny cracks that emitted the hiss of escaping air, and the occasional crystal formation shaped by centuries of volcanic heat, meeting frozen water. Our headlamps cut swaths through the darkness, bouncing off icy walls and reflecting into endless tunnels. Then we noticed the claw marks. Not animal tracks. Too deep, too deliberate. Long scratches gouged into the ice and the black volcanic rock beneath. They didn't belong to anything known. We exchanged uneasy glances, dismissing it as natural fissures at first until Katrin stepped closer and touched one. The ice shivered under her hand, almost like it was alive. I laughed nervously. It's just ice, it's just ice. But none of us felt reassured. 2 hours in, we reached the main cavern, the heart of the glacier cave, enormous and hollow. The air grew warmer, humid and thick, carrying a metallic tang that made my stomach churn. It was then Henrik disappeared. We didn't hear a scream. We didn't hear anything. 1 second, he was documenting the wall with his camera. The next gone. His rope remained slack, dangling over the edge of a fissure that seemed shallower than it should have been. I remember Sigrid's scream echoing, sharp and sudden, the ice amplifying it tenfold. We searched frantically. John crawled into every side passage. Katrin and I checked every ice tunnel, but there was nothing and only silence. Only the faint sound of dripping water, and then the whispers. Not from the entrance, not from each other, but from the walls themselves. Names. My name. Jean's, Katrin's, even Henrik's. The walls repeated them over and over, though we hadn't spoken. Panic set in. We tried to retreat. We turned toward the entrance, but the path had changed. The fissures we had navigated carefully were gone, replaced with solid ice walls. Every corridor seemed to twist, turning back on itself. The cave moved hours, maybe days past, I can't tell. Time lost meaning. My headlamp flickered, revealing fleeting shadows at the edge of our vision, vanishing when we looked directly. We kept shouting, but our voices were swallowed by the cave, answered only by our own echoes. And then I saw Henrik, or I think I did, standing at the far end of a tunnel that had never been there before. His camera hung by its strap, swinging. He raised a hand. But his eyes, they weren't his, black, hollow, and endless. And before I could call out, he disappeared into the wall itself, like ice and rock had swallowed him whole. Sigrid tried to calm us. Keep moving. Don't stop. We'll find the exit. We ran. We crawled. We clawed through ice tunnels that stretched endlessly. Every turn felt familiar and alien at the same time, as if the cave remembered where we'd been and rearranged itself just to trap us. At one point, I fell into a chamber filled with a strange black mist. My limbs went numb. I thought I'd suffocate, but I didn't. Instead, I heard Henrik's voice whispering from the mist. "It's not the ice. It's waiting." I scrambled back to Sigrid and Katrin. We finally reached what we thought was the exit, a slit in the ice we had descended hours before. I shouted for the others. They were gone. No rope, no footprints, nothing. Only the faint echo of their names in the ice. I stumbled out alone, blinking in the sunlight. The glacier looked unchanged. The slit, the cavern, even the fissures, all as if I had imagined them. But in my pack, I found Henrik's camera recording silently. When I played it back, the last few seconds showed the 5 of us walking into a tunnel, and the walls subtly reshaping behind us, sealing the path, erasing all trace. I left Iceland that day. I never returned, but sometimes in the quiet I hear the faint hum of the glacier cave whispering my name, and I know it's still moving, waiting. And one day, it will call me back.